Dear students, welcome you here in the demonstration, embryology demonstration. Today I would like to talk about the development of the GI tract, the development of the stomach, the pancreas, and all of the parts of the GI tract. Here you can see the schedule of my presentation today. First, I would like to talk about the development of the primitive gut. After, we will see the parts of the primitive gut. I will show you then the dorsal and the ventral mesenteries. We are talking about the development of the stomach, the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas. Of course, we will see the developmental malformations of these structures, and after, we will see the development of the hindgut and the abnormalities. Let's see now the first point, the development of the primitive gut. Here you can see this picture. I hope you know it very well. The development of the primitive gut will start with the folding, with the craniocaudal folding of the embryo. Here you can see the main germ layers, the ectoderm, the endoderm, and the mesoderm, of course. Anteriorly, the buccopharyngeal membrane. In front of it, you can see the heart field, what I told you in the earlier presentation. And there in the posterior part, you can see the cloacal membrane. During the craniocaudal folding of the embryo, here you can see that the brain vesicles, they grow so fast. So that's why the pericardial cavity with the heart tube will move towards the final thoracic cavity, and you see it will be behind the buccopharyngeal membrane. And this proximal invagination of the endoderm will be the foregut, and here you can see posteriorly the development of the hindgut. In the middle, this part is called the midgut, which will communicate with the yolk sac with a wide canal first, and it will be smaller and smaller during the development. This is what you can see in the third picture. The foregut is bigger, the heart tube is located behind the buccopharyngeal membrane in front of the whole tube, primitive gut. Here you can see the hindgut, and this is the communication between the midgut and the yolk sac. And this is the final position. After the buccopharyngeal, behind the buccopharyngeal membrane, there you can see the foregut. Here we have the hindgut, and in the middle you can see the midgut, and with the vitelline duct will communicate with the yolk sac. After, of course, we have to talk about the lateral folding of the embryo too. Because of the growing of the somite there, we see the lateral folding of the embryo. Again, the uppermost layer, the ectoderm, is visible. Here we can see the mesoderm, the yellowish part is the endoderm. And you see that the final anterior wall of the whole body will fuse anteriorly, and there in the middle we see the primitive gut. Finally, from the endoderm will be the epithelium of it, and from the splanchnic layer of the mesoderm will be the muscular part of the wall, the connective tissue, and of course the peritoneum, which will cover it. And the primitive gut is fixed to the posterior body wall with the dorsal mesentery, what we can see very well here in this picture. Let's see this whole procedure, the beginning, with the video. The development of the gastrointestinal tract will start at the 3rd week. Here you can see the folding with the folding. Uppermost layer is the ectoderm, the red one, the mesoderm, the yellowish is the endoderm. You can see the heart field is located in front of the buccopharyngeal membrane, And during the craniocaudal folding, it will go towards the pericardial cavity behind the buccopharyngeal membrane. There you can see anterior the foregut. There we have the hindgut. And first the midgut will communicate with the yolk sac with a wider. And finally, just the vitelline duct will be the connection between the midgut and the yolk sac. Let's see the folding from the lateral view. This is the lateral folding because of the growing of the somites there, the middle part of the mesoderm. Here you can see the formation of it. Ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm with the somite, intermediate, and lateral plate mesoderm you can see. From the endoderm will be the primitive gut. From the splanchnic layer of the mesoderm will be the muscular layer and the connective tissue part of the wall of the intestine, and there the double layer which will fix it to the posterior wall. The second point is the discussion of the parts of the primitive gut. Here you can see a picture about the structure of the primitive gut in the week 4. As you can see here, we can divide it into 3 main parts: the foregut, the midgut, and the hindgut. The proximal part of the foregut, which is between the buccopharyngeal membrane and the trachobronchial, the vertical, from where the lungs will develop, this is called the pharyngeal gut. You heard the development of the pharyngeal gut in another presentation. And also you heard the details about the development of the trachobronchial, the vertical, the trachea, the lungs, and the esophagus in an earlier presentation. Now, in this presentation, I would like to show you the development of the other parts of the foregut, the stomach, the development of the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas, which will be the parts of the foregut. After, the next is the midgut, which will contain the duodenum, the distal part of the duodenum, the ileum, the jejunum, the cecum, the ascending colon, and the 2/3 of the transverse colon. This part will develop from the midgut. And finally, you can see the hindgut, which will be until the cloacal membrane. From the hindgut will develop the distal 1/3 of the colon transversum, the descending colon, the sigmoid colon, and the rectum, and the upper part of the anal canal. Here you can see all of the factors which are involved in the development of the GA tract. You can see the Hox genes, the sonic hedgehog. These are really important in the differentiation of the GA tract. You can see that all of the main parts of the GA tract, they have an own factor which will regulate the formation of the stomach, duodenum, small and large intestine. Here you can see 2 main sentences which summarize for you the origin of the different layers of the gut wall. Here you can see that from the endoderm will be the epithelial lining of the digestive system and the parenchyma of the liver and the pancreas. But the other parts, for example, the muscle, the connective tissue, and the peritoneal layer of these organs, they will originate from the splanchnic mesoderm. In the second picture, you can see the structure in the 5th week of the development. We can see the pharyngeal pouches in the pharyngeal gut. You see the proximal part of the trachobronchial system, the esophagus, the stomach, the liver bud with the pancreas, pancreatic buds, a small intestine, and the large intestine. One part of the large intestine will be from the midgut, and finally you can see the hindgut. First, before we are going to details, I would like to repeat with you the main parts of the peritoneum during the development. Here in this picture you can see the primitive gut again, and the double layer of the peritoneum which will fix the whole system to the posterior body wall. This is called the dorsal mesentery here, which has different parts. The upper part is called the dorsal mesogastrium, which will fix the stomach. We can talk about dorsal mesoduodenum. That which will fix the midgut and the loops is called the proper mesentery. And finally, the hindgut is fixed with the dorsal mesocolon to the posterior body wall. Here you can see that within these layers we have the main arteries. The artery of the foregut will be the celiac artery. The artery of the midgut is the superior mesenteric artery, and the artery of the hindgut is the inferior mesenteric artery. Here I would like to take your attention for that how important it is to know the anatomy, because if you know what are the organs which are supplied by the superior mesenteric artery, for example, immediately you can answer or the question that what are the derivatives of the midgut. Let's see the other part, which is the ventral mesentery. The ventral mesogastrium from the septum transversum will develop. During the development of the liver, we'll divide it into two main parts. That ligament which is between the anterior body wall and the liver, this is called the falciform ligament. And that which is between the liver and the stomach, this is called the lesser omentum. We can divide the lesser omentum into two parts. I hope you know it from the anatomical presentations. That which is between the liver and the stomach, this is called the hepatogastric ligament. And that which is between the liver and the duodenum, this is called the hepatoduodenal ligament. Here you can see that model, what I demonstrated for you in the anatomy practice, anatomy video. Here is the liver, the ventral mesogastrium, the two parts of it, the falciform ligament between the liver and the anterior body wall. Between the liver and the stomach, the lesser omentum is visible, what we can divide it into hepatogastric and hepatoduodenal ligament. And here we can see the dorsal mesogastrium. The spleen divides it into two main parts. Between the stomach and the spleen, we can talk about the gastroleonal ligament, and between the spleen and the diaphragm, the phrenicoleonal ligament. The upper part of the stomach is fixed to the posterior body wall by the gastrophrenic ligament. The intestinal loops, they are fixed with mesentery, and the lowest part of the dorsal mesentery is a dorsal mesocolon, which will fix the main parts of the colon to the posterior body wall during the development. Now I would like to continue with the description of the development of the stomach, which is from the foregut. It is really important to understand here the position of the primitive gut at the beginning. At the beginning you can see that in front of the primitive gut we can see the liver and the spleen, all of these organs with the ligaments which will fix them to the anterior and posterior body wall, they are in the mid-sagittal direction. But during the rotation, because we have a rotation around the longitudinal axis of the stomach and the whole GA tract, you can see the rotation. The liver is going towards the right side, to the right hypochondrium, and you see that the spleen is going to the left hypochondrium, and the stomach, which has a right and a left side first, it will rotate too, and the left side will be in the anterior, it will be anteriorly, the right side will be posteriorly, so the stomach will be in the frontal plane during the rotation. So that is what you can see in this picture. We have this longitudinal rotation, what I told you, around the longitudinal axis. But also we have there another rotation, which will go through a sagittal axis. And during this rotation, the pyloric part of the stomach will go upward to the right, like the cardiac part of the stomach will go downward to the left. And you can see also that this posterior part of the stomach, it goes so fast compared to the other part, so we can talk about the lesser curvature and the greater curvature of the stomach. Of course, because of this rotation, the duodenum will be also in the right side, and the duodenum will form a C shape here in the right side of the abdominal cavity. Here you can see a schematic picture about this rotation. First, the liver, the stomach. These are in the mid-sagittal section. We can see the ligaments which will fix them to each other. The falciform, the lesser omentum, and the dorsal mesogastrium. During the development and the rotation, the liver will grow, will be in the right side. You see the stomach will be later in the frontal section. So the right side of the stomach will be posteriorly, the left side will be anteriorly. So that's why, because of this rotation, the two vagus nerves which are located next to the stomach, the left will come anteriorly and will innervate the anterior wall of the stomach, like the right one innervates the posterior wall of the stomach. Let's see this in the video. Here you can see the stomach, the development of the stomach. This is the respiratory diverticle, and here is the hepatic bud. If we magnify, after we can see the position of the stomach and the liver first, they are in the mid-sagittal section. Here you can see the two vagus nerves, the right and the left. During the rotation, the left will go anteriorly, the right will go posteriorly. Here you can see the liver, the stomach, the spleen, and the pancreas. And finally, during the development, the pancreas is fixed to the posterior body wall, and you can see the final position of the stomach, the lesser omentum, gastrosplenic, and the phrenico-lienal ligament behind the omental bursa. Let's see from another view, where we can see the rotation through the sagittal axis of the stomach. The posterior part will go fast, so that's why the greater curvature will develop. Because of the rotation, behind the stomach we can find the omental bursa. The pyloric part will go right, upward, the cardiac part will go to the left, and here you can see the final position of the ligaments in the final position after the rotation. The next question or the next point will be the development of the liver, gallbladder, and pancreas. All of them, they will develop from the foregut. It is at the border of the foregut and the midgut. Let's see first the development of the liver. Here you can see the proliferation of the liver bud. It penetrates into the septum transversum. And during this development, here we have a connection, a narrower connection, which will be a hepatic duct. And from this will develop the cystic diverticulum, and from this will develop the gallbladder and the bile duct. Finally, the hepatic duct and the cystic duct will fuse and will form the common bile duct. So if we see the liver cords will form the parenchyma of the liver and the lining of the biliary ducts. Within this, from the umbilical vein and the vitelline vein, will be the special hepatic sinuses. But from the mesoderm of the septum transversum will develop the hemopoietic cells, also the Kupffer cells, which are the special macrophages of the liver and the connective tissue parts of it. It is really important to know that in the 10th week, the liver is very huge. It forms approximately the 10% of the body weight because it has a really important hemopoietic function. It is important in the development of the blood cells. So this is the formation of the liver and the gallbladder. And as you see, parallelly with these procedures, we'll develop the pancreas too. So I am showing you the same picture. Here you can see the main details about the development of the pancreas. The development of the pancreas will start from proximal, from a ventral and the dorsal pancreatic bud. But during the rotation, as what I told you earlier, the ventral bud moves posteriorly and will lie under and below the dorsal pancreatic bud. And finally, here they will be there because of this rotation. Of course, the bile duct, the common bile duct, will rotate too and will be behind the duodenum. And finally, when they fuse, the main pancreatic duct and the common bile duct will open together to the duodenum. Here you can see with two different colors the ducts of the pancreas. We can talk about the main duct of the pancreas, which is opening to the major papilla. It will be from the ventral bud and from the dorsal part of, distal part of the dorsal bud. And we have another duct which is called the accessory duct of the pancreas. It will open to the minor papilla and it will develop from the proximal part of the dorsal bud during the development. Of course, we have to mention the endocrine part of the pancreas, the Langerhans islands. They will originate also from the parenchyma, but the connective tissue is from the mesoderm. Let's see now the development of the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas in this video. Here you can see the development of the liver bud. It is penetrating into the septum transversum. Here you can see the falciform ligament and the lesser omentum between the liver and the stomach. There, the proximal, the first small, the vertical of the bile, the gallbladder, you can see also the gallbladder, the bile duct, common bile duct. And during the rotation, you can see that this opening will move posteriorly behind the duodenum. We can see the common bile duct, and it will open together with the pancreatic duct to the duodenum. Let's see now the development of the pancreas. During the development of the pancreas, we can talk about the ventral pancreatic bud and the dorsal pancreatic bud. During the rotation, the ventral pancreatic duct will move posteriorly, will form the uncinate process of the head of the pancreas finally. Here you can see the rotation. It goes like this. After, they will fuse. Here you can see the fusion and will form the main ducts, the main pancreatic duct and the accessory duct of the pancreas. The major papilla will go to the major pancreatic duct with the common bile duct. The accessory is going to the minor papilla of the duodenum. It is also really important to understand that first, the pancreas and the duodenum, it is fixed to the posterior body wall. It is located in the dorsal mesoduodenum. But during the rotation, the pancreas and the descending part, inferior horizontal part of the duodenum, will be fixed to the posterior body wall, and they will be retroperitoneal. They will have retroperitoneal position. Okay. The next point is the development of the midgut. This picture shows you the main parts of the midgut. The midgut, from the midgut will be the duodenum, jejunum, ileum, the cecum, the ascending colon, and the transverse colon until the 2/3 of it. Because of the very active growing, excessive growing, a primitive primary intestinal loop will develop. Here you can see this intestinal loop, which has a cephalic part upward, and it has a caudal limb downward. In the middle, you can see the vitelline duct, which will form a communication between the midgut and the yolk sac. This vitelline duct is located in the ileum, so that's why we know that from the cephalic part will develop the part of the duodenum, which is under the major papilla, the jejunum, and one part of the ileum. From the caudal part will develop the part of the ileum, the distal part of the ileum. Here you can see the cecum with the appendix, the ascending colon, and the transverse colon until the 2/3. It is really important to know that at the week 6, we have not enough space within the development abdominal cavity, and you see that this primitive intestinal loop will bulge to the umbilicus, and it will form a physiological umbilical herniation. What's happening after? When we have this primitive loop, this primitive intestinal loop will form a rotation around the axis, and the axis will be the artery of the midgut, which is the superior mesenteric artery. So when we have this primitive intestinal loop, the small intestine, the parts of the small intestine will grow so fast and will form loops, and that's why we have no enough space in the umbilicus, so the intestinal loops will go back towards the abdominal cavity, and during this transport we have additional rotation more. First, the small intestine will go back to the abdominal cavity, to the left part of it, and finally the large intestine, the cecum, will go there to the right side of the abdominal cavity. This rotation altogether will be 270 degree, and here you can see the final part of it, because finally the cecum, which is located in the right apical part of the abdominal cavity, will go downward to the right lower part of it, and here you can see the final position. And this rotation, 270 degree, is the final rotation of the whole intestine, and that's why we have this very special anatomical position, that the small intestinal loops, they are here in the middle, and the colon will form like a frame around these loops. And of course, if we have an abnormality, in this case, this normal anatomical position will change. And finally, you can see, because of the rotation of the stomach, from the greater curvature will develop the double layer of the greater omentum, which will cover the intestinal loops. And now, let's continue the description. Here we can see these steps within one diagram. This is the primary intestinal loop there with the cranial caudal part, which will form a rotation within the umbilicus. It's 90 degrees. And after, during the growing, the intestinal loops will go back towards the abdominal cavity. First, the small intestinal loops, after finally the circum to the right upper part of the abdominal cavity. And here you can see the final rotation when the circum from the right upper corner will go to the right lower iliac fossa and with the appendix. So this is the rotation of the intestinal loops during the development. A final position is visible in this picture. I hope you know it very well because we demonstrated for you it in the anatomy practice and also in the earlier videos. Here you can see the liver in the right hypochondrium, and the falciform ligament will fix this to the anterior body wall. In the lower border we can see the ligamentum teres hepatis, which is the closure of the umbilical vein. After, we can see the other ligament, which will be between the liver and the stomach. This is the lesser omentum, which has two parts, the hepatogastric ligament and the hepatoduodenal ligament. We do not see the other parts, the spleen, the hepatoleonal, the gastroleonal and the phrenicoleonal ligament, but you see very well the omental bursa, which is located behind the stomach. From the greater curvature, here they will be from the ventral mesogastrium. From the greater curvature, we'll develop the greater omentum, which will cover the intestinal loops. And there, behind the stomach and the lesser omentum, you can see the omental bursa. And there is the foramen, which is called the epiploic foramen, how we can go into the omental bursa. Here, the border of this epiploic foramen will be the hepatoduodenal ligament, where we have the portal vein, the common bile duct, and the proper hepatic artery. In this picture, you can see very well those parts of the GI tract which will attach to the posterior body wall during the development, and they will be in the retroperitoneum. They will have retroperitoneal position. What are those? Here you can see the ascending colon and the descending colon, and of course the main part of the duodenum and the pancreas. But we have other parts which will be intraperitoneal, and they will be fixed to the posterior body wall with a double layer of the peritoneum. What are those? The transverse colon is fixed to the posterior body wall by the transverse mesocolon. The jejunum, ileum loops will be fixed towards the posterior body wall with the mesentery crude, the mesentery, and the sigmoid colon is fixed with the sigmoid mesocolon to the posterior body wall. Here you can see the schematic picture, what I showed you also in the anatomy practice. I hope with your teacher you will see it in the seminar too, in the dissecting room. The horizontal section of the abdominal cavity, where we can see the liver, the stomach, the spleen, and the position of the ligaments. And here you can see the mid-sagittal section of the abdominal cavity with the ligaments. From the greater curvature from the stomach will originate the greater omentum, but you can see it will form a connection with the posterior body wall. First, it will communicate between the layers. We have a cavity which will communicate with the omental bursa first, but during the development, they will fuse, and we have no communication between these parts. And also you can see that the transverse mesocolon will fuse also with these layers. So there we have only just one ligament, which is the transverse mesocolon, which will fix the colon transversum to the posterior body wall. The cavity here, the omental bursa, and we know that behind the omental bursa we can find the pancreas in the retroperitoneum. How can you reach during operation? How can you operate the pancreas? What are those ligaments what you have to cut to reach the pancreas and the omental bursa? First, we can go through the lesser omentum, or we can go through this ligament which is between the stomach and the colon. This is the gastrocolic ligament, or if we move both of them under the transverse mesocolon, we can find the third way how we can reach the pancreas. In this picture also I can demonstrate for you the excavation, the lowest part of the abdominal cavity in the male cadaver, the excavation, rectovesical excavation or pouch. Let's see now the video. Here you can see the primitive intestinal loop there, and this is the cranial part and the caudal part, duodenum, jejunum, one part of the ileum, cecum, ascending transverse colon. The first rotation will be 90 degrees around the superior mesenteric artery, what you can see in the middle. And there you can see the small intestinal loops. And during the growing, the rotation will continue and it will go back from the physiological herniation, will go back to the abdominal cavity. First the small intestinal loops, finally the cecum in the right apical part of the abdominal cavity. And finally the cecum will go downward to the right iliac fossa. Here you can see also the development of the appendix. The final position, small intestinal loops in the middle, and the colon will form a frame around the loops. This is the development of the peritoneum, and the different parts of the GA tract during the development will fuse to the posterior body wall. Here you can see the ascending colon and the descending colon will have retroperitoneal situation there. And here in the mid-sagittal section you can see the development of the greater omentum and the transverse mesocolon. You see that these layers, they are fused, and finally this is the greater omentum, this is the transverse mesocolon which will fix the structures to the posterior body wall. And finally, let's see the abnormalities of the midgut in this portion. The abnormalities of the GA tract, here you can see the three main types of it. If we see a development of the Q-shaped organ, we can talk about agenesis, which means a complete absence of one intestinal segment, which is unfortunately is a very severe abnormality. And the other is the atresia or aplasia, where the lumen is narrower. Here you can see extreme narrowing of the lumen. Here you can see one example for that, which is called the apple peel atresia. Here we have a narrowing within the small intestine, so the proximal part of the GA tract is dilated. Like the other parts, they are really narrow, and like a peel of the apple will surround the root of the mesentery. Here you can see also other example for the aplasia, atresia of the GA tract. We can talk about hyperplasia too, when a smooth muscle, for example, in the wall is hypertrophied. It is, for example, in case of pyloric stenosis, when the sphincter muscle around the pylorus, it's bigger, it's hypertrophied, and that's why here you can see the main symptom of the small newborn. They have a very active, very intensive vomiting. The other developmental malformation of the midgut is visible here, where we can see the remnant of the vitelline duct. The vitelline duct was the communication with the midgut, with the yolk sac. Here you can see that from this could be like a small diverticle. This is the Meckel diverticle. It's like a small appendix on the ileum, 40-50 centimeter backward from the ileocecal junction. We can see this protrusion on the wall. If we have their pancreatic tissue or stomach, or glands from the stomach, they can cause very severe clinical symptoms like an appendicitis. Also, we could have a fistula, a communication between the anterior body wall and the small intestinal loops, or maybe just a ligament which will fix the intestine to the anterior body wall. If we are talking about the other developmental malformations, of course we can mention duplications of the different parts or abnormal rotation. I told you this 270 degree. It could be in the opposite side, or if the rotation is not in the complete way, in this case the right intestine is located in the left side and the large intestine is located in the right side of the abdominal cavity. During the development of the pancreas, if this rotation is not complete, in this case the pancreas will surround the duodenum. This is the annular pancreas. And I told you that we can find accessory pancreatic tissue in another part of the GI tract, for example in the Meckel diverticle. And we can mention the developmental malformations of the liver and the bile duct. We can talk about extra and intrahepatic biliary atresia. We can talk about double gallbladder or double cystic duct. So a lot of developmental malformations could be developed. Please see the details in the handbook. And finally, the last point is the development of the hindgut. Here you can see that part. From the hindgut will develop the distal part, distal 1/3 of the transverse colon, the descending colon, the sigmoid colon, and the rectum, the other upper part of the anal canal. Here you can see that first the urorectal septum will divide it into two main parts. To the primitive urogenital sinus, from this will develop the urinary bladder and the urethra. And here you can see the anorectal canal, from where will be the rectum and the distal part of the GI tract. This cloacal membrane is divided into two main parts by the septum. The upper is the urogenital membrane and the lower part is the anal membrane. The anal membrane is the border between that part of the anal canal which will develop from the endoderm and the lower part which will be developed from the proctodome here, which will be from the ectoderm. This border is between the columnar zone or under the columnar zone of the anal canal. Is called linea pectina. And let's see the movie about this formation. Here you can see the urorectal septum, which will divide the primitive sinus, and the anorectal canal posteriorly. The septum will fuse and will divide the cloacal membrane into two parts, the urogenital membrane and the anal membrane. Behind we have the proctodome. This is the complete division of this part. And let's see the developmental malformation. Of course, if this anal membrane won't disappear, in this case we have the anus imperforatus. And we could develop here, we could have communication between the rectum and the bladder. These are called fistula. And finally, I would like to mention developmental malformation, genetical developmental malformation of the colon, the large intestine. It's called a Hirschsprung disease. In this case, the ganglionic cells, the parasympathetic ganglionic cells of the colon is missing. So that's why we have no normal peristaltic movement in the large intestine. So as I told you, all of the details you can see, you can check in your handbook, in the Langman's book. And finally, I would like to thank you for your attention with this picture about the 3D anatomy model. I hope you know very well the position of the different organs based on your embryology knowledge. Thank you so much for your attention.